Simon Dixon here, and welcome to episode 59 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. It's for Friday, and we're going to go through everything that happened this week in Bitcoin, in macro, and geopolitics. As always, we've got a packed show because the information flow is not slowing down. And so if you are new to the show, welcome. My name is Simon Dixon. I spent over 2 decades of my life obsessing over the topic of Bitcoin investing and money. And I would like to prepare you for a world dominated by Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs. And each and every week we share the journey together. It's the hardest talk about the hardest form of money. And Bitcoin is the proof of work network to protect you from the Federal Reserve's proof of weapons network. And so we will transition together. In the Bitcoin section, the main topic we're going to cover today, we got a bunch of stuff to cover. But allegedly, Peter Todd is Satoshi Nakamoto. How will that impact Bitcoin? And is he Satoshi Nakamoto? I'll give you my take in the Bitcoin section, as well as going through some of the news about the recovered coins in Bitfinex and much of the shenanigans that the SEC has been up to. Then we'll move over to the macro section. And in the macro, I have dug very deeply into the BRICS cryptocurrency white paper. I'm going to be sharing everything I know because in a week and a half, it is the BRICS summit where they're going to be talking about the launch of their new cryptocurrency. Is it good? Is it bad? What will it be like? How does it compare to other things? We'll cover all of that and more. And where does Bitcoin fit in? And then finally, in the geopolitical section, we are inevitably waiting for Israel's retaliation to Iran's retaliation. And it will impact the US election because it's only 30 or approximate days away, only about 1 month away right now. So we're going to be covering all of that and more. And we got a bunch to go through, and we'll make sure we share exactly how everything is connected. So let's jump straight in with the Bitcoin section. So this week in Bitcoin, we had HBO, which launched a documentary. And it was a brilliant marketing strategy because we were all talking about it and promoting it. And everyone obviously tuned in to watch it because they claimed that Peter Todd is Satoshi Nakamoto. And I'll just share my experience of Peter Todd and why I don't think he is Satoshi Nakamoto. As I said, it's great marketing. It got everyone talking about it. But the allegation is that he controls the 1.1 million Bitcoin rather than the more likely candidates that are Satoshi Nakamoto that have all passed away, and way more likely those keys cannot be accessed anymore. And so the documentary decided to film Peter Todd and make the accusation that he is Bitcoin. Now, it's important to understand, what does it matter? So right in the beginning of Bitcoin, the only miner was a couple of miners. One was Hal Finney and one was Satoshi Nakamoto. Across those different networks, right in the beginning, Bitcoin was paying 50 Bitcoin every 10 minutes to anybody that was mining. It bootstrapped the network, and the idea was to start mining so that it actually could verify all the transactions and perform the role of central bank. So initially, it was very centralized, but over time, people would compete to receive those 50 Bitcoins every 10 minutes, and more miners would join the network. It started on the cypherpunk mailing list when Satoshi Nakamoto released a white paper saying a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And the first block contained a quote from the Times newspaper. And in the Times newspaper, it was talking about banks on the brink of financial disaster to show that it was actually time-stamped. And the miners would mine those blocks and all the transactions that would happen. And over time, it became more and more decentralized. And people would fire up their laptops and start mining and competing for the 50 Bitcoin. After the first 4 years, the number of Bitcoins you receive every 10 minutes halved to 25. And then 4 years later, 12 and a half. And then 4 years later, 6 and a quarter. And now 3 1/8. And every 4 years, it halves until eventually 21 million Bitcoins are all mined. It went from laptops on the CPU power to more expensive graphic cards and more powerful GPUs. And then eventually it got institutionalized as ASICs were manufactured in China using chips in Taiwan with special application-specific integrated circuits that would then create massive Bitcoin mining farms. And eventually they became multi-billion-dollar mining companies IPOing and geographically distributed all around the world, whether it be enemies geopolitically, so that no one country can take down Bitcoin. And now we have that largest supercomputer that provides the most amount of security. And there's also those data centers are working with AI in order to create this new integrated model where Bitcoin is used to monetize the data centers that are powering artificial intelligence. And it's getting more and more energy efficient over time as people are using Bitcoin in order to utilize wasted electricity and even engage in things like cartelment, which is creating a renewable energy revolution where countries are seeing how they can use all these incredibly innovative new renewable energies in order to mine Bitcoin as a beta test and a bounty for creating the most efficient, cheapest form of electricity. Even volcanoes in El Salvador or nuclear power plants within Texas and everything all around the world, and even dirty energy, and people are deciding to work with different miners as a result of that. So it is creating the freest form of market the world has ever seen. And that is where we've come from. But where did we start? Does it matter? No, it does not matter, because all the code is completely open source. And yeah, if Satoshi Nakamoto, who mined approximately 1 million Bitcoins when trying to bootstrap the network, has the private key, then they could decide to move those coins and they could send them to an exchange. And if they sent them to an exchange, it would probably do what happens every time when coins are sent to exchanges. You know, the US government has over 200,000. They decide to send 10,000 over to an exchange. It crashes the price for a little bit. It goes through an OTC transaction, or it is used to sell at market price. And everybody that is a Bitcoin thinker loves it and celebrates because they get to buy some Bitcoin with their fiat currency that month at a cheaper rate, which means that the Bitcoins get redistributed from the million that are owned by Satoshi over to those people that get to buy them at a cheaper rate. And anyone that understands the 4-year cycle knows that over any 4-year cycle in history, not financial advice, I can't say it will happen again, but over every 4-year cycle, Bitcoin has outperformed every single asset class, whether it be real estate, whether it be the S&P, whether it be gold, whether it be any of the more speculative assets like private equity or venture capital. Bitcoin has beat the shit out of all of them. And so that is why it does not matter, because the code is open source. And we've already seen all the attack vectors over the years. When one party tries to control Bitcoin, they succeed, they don't succeed, they fail, and Bitcoin gets stronger each and every time. So Satoshi could move those Bitcoin. My personal belief is the people that created it are no longer with us and those keys are lost. Every now and then, everyone tries to FUD you into selling your Bitcoin by making you think the magic Satoshi is coming back to sell his Bitcoin. And then that is used to manipulate the price in order to redistribute those Bitcoins. So the project is not dependent upon Satoshi Nakamoto. Satoshi Nakamoto handed over the GitHub repo. That is completely open source, and everyone can put forward Bitcoin improvement proposals in order to try and propose the code. There is an extensive process for testing that code. And then even once they release the code, it needs to reach 75% consensus to hit a certain trigger point by miners. And then node operators can either verify those transactions or not. And so no one part of the ecosystem controls the whole ecosystem, creating the world's first largest distributed supercomputer that no government can even invest the resources in order to try and shut down, because nobody controls one part of the ecosystem, which creates this trustless network, which is providing an exit for those that want to exit from the atrocities and the wars and the death, destruction, and miseries that inflation is causing because of the financial apartheid created by the Federal Reserve in order to change capitalist economies, get governments deep in debt, and fund wars in order to support world reserve currencies. Okay. So it exists on a distributed supercomputer, so it really doesn't matter. It's open source code, so it really doesn't matter. And yes, I have met Peter Todd many times, and I only saw him come around approximately in 2012. I spoke at the very first Bitcoin conference in Prague in 2011, and I published the very first book in the world to include Bitcoin, Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust. You are welcome to get a free copy of that as well by signing up to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal at any time, where I give you a bunch of free stuff to help you transition to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs. So what was the documentary making accusations that made them say, we know who Satoshi Nakamoto is? Well, the first accusation was that Peter Todd used a pseudonym to give Bitcoin credibility. So the white paper was released in 2008. The network launched in January 2009. And the accusation is that Peter Todd was at that time, in fact, the accusation was that he was creating Bitcoin. But for anybody that knows Peter Todd, he was finishing his fine arts degree at the time. And he wasn't even in any of the cryptography world yet. He wasn't really, there's no documented evidence that he was around before then. And Bitcoin wasn't even on his radar until 2012, because I remember who was involved in 2011 and before, and Peter Todd wasn't around. Now, maybe he was hiding in the background, lurking in the background, pretending to be, or pretending that he wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto. So what was the second accusation? Well, the second accusation in the documentary was that a 2010 Bitcoin Hard Talk post was connected to him. So in the early days, we all used to talk on Bitcoin Hard Talk. It was the forum we all used to discuss. It later kind of transitioned to Reddit a lot more. But Bitcoin Talk, sorry, not Bitcoin Hard Talk. Bitcoin Hard Talk is the podcast that you're listening to right now. By the way, if you want this in podcast form, head over to Apple, look up Bitcoin Hard Talk, and you can download this each and every week as well. Or you can get it from the Bitcoin Hard Talk portal for free, or you can subscribe to YouTube and hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, hit all, and that helps me because very few people are seeing the content because they hate what I'm covering, to get you ahead of the curve around the atrocities of the proof of weapons network. So what did HBO suggest? It suggested that Peter Todd accidentally revealed himself as Satoshi by forgetting to switch accounts when he was posting in Bitcoin Talk forum. So there was a follow-up post. Basically, there was a post, and then there was a follow-up post a few minutes later, which essentially the accusation was that the post a few minutes later would, basically imagine you forget to switch your account. You post something, you then delete it, and then you post it a few minutes later. That's the type of behavior you would do if you accidentally did that. But what they failed to admit was that the post was actually 13 hours later. So that's not unanimous, that's not real proof, but, it's more like you were just commenting on a post that you used a different account. So this was apparently the evidence that made up that. And so the third accusation was that Peter Todd, that they claim to be Satoshi Nakamoto, was working on the replace by fee feature. And this was basically something that they connected to Peter Todd because Peter Todd was pushing forward that initiative. I don't want to get too geeky, but basically replace by fee is where you could decide that in order to get a Bitcoin transaction included in a block faster, you could replace the fee, give a higher fee, and then it would be more likely to be included in the next block. The higher you pay, because there is a queue for transactions that you want to get in the next block and mined by miners and verified by node operators, you could replace the transaction And this also supports the fact that eventually all the Bitcoins will be mined, and the security of the network in the future will be miners that are mining blocks in order to receive transaction fees. So this creates the sustainability of the market. So they claimed because Peter Todd was pushing forward that Bitcoin improvement proposal and coders worked on coding that, that they connected that to because Satoshi Nakamoto wanted to implement that. But the reality is that Satoshi Nakamoto wanted to implement that, but replaced by fee did not get implemented until 2014 anyway. This is years after Bitcoin's creation, 5 years in fact. And the final claim was that HBO claimed that this was a pre-planned by Satoshi anyway, to which, you know, to me, that's just a bit of a stretch. So what's the final claim? It was just one of the many technical improvements that Peter Todd actually made when he was getting involved in putting forward Bitcoin improvement protocols and putting together suggestions in the GitHub repo. So the final one, which apparently makes the accusation completely true, is that there was an encrypted message. All right, yeah, there was an encrypted message about sacrificing Bitcoins. This was basically a joke. So the accusation is because in an encrypted message, Peter Todd said that he could sacrifice some of the early Bitcoins. They were taking that as literal, that he could sacrifice the early Bitcoins. And so his accusation is that this was a joke that was taken out of context. Peter Todd said that he was referring to proving the blockchain integrity, that nobody can actually do it. It was just a joke because we talk about, you know, what happened, for example, at Bank of America the other day when everyone just deleted the transactions and everyone logged into their online banking and they suddenly had zero balances. But because Bitcoin is backed by the world's largest supercomputer and all of those records are backed up and published by everybody, there is no way to sacrifice them. And the open source code will verify that as well. So this is not connected to destroying any of those coins because those 1.1 million coins that were mined by Bitcoin, this is not unanimous proof that Peter Todd is Satoshi Nakamoto. All in all, it was a marketing strategy, and HBO wanted, for whatever reason, to create some FUD in the market or create views for their documentary. All of the accusations are not conclusive, and to me, they're pretty far-fetched, really, as well. So Peter Todd, from all my experience and from everything around the accusations, is not Satoshi Nakamoto, and even if he was, it does not matter. But I decided to come out and tweet and appreciate and show Peter Todd my gratitude for some of the work he did in the early days. And immediately people were telling me, hey, have you read some of Peter Todd's posts recently? Not his toasts, his posts. And so I went back and started to look at some of his posts. And this just reminded me why it is so important that we do not idolize people within the Bitcoin community, because it is open source anyway, and humans are infallible. And the reason we love Bitcoin is because no personality can change it based upon their political ideologies. And Peter Todd, you have gone down a very dark path. You have bought in to all the propaganda of the proof of weapons network, despite early involvement in Bitcoin. And I thought that Bitcoiners were more wise. If you haven't figured out that right now, and I'll cover it more in the geopolitical section, that covert regime changes are CIA operations in order to take over oil resources and destabilize regions, then you are as gullible as those early people that when we told them about Bitcoin, they thought that it could be deleted or changed, and they didn't understand how the network actually worked. And so there were some very extreme views around Peter Todd's desire for Israel to throw nuclear bombs at Iran and create World War III and a nuclear warfare that will come as a result of that. Peter, you have gone off the dark end, but hopefully you're watching Bitcoin Hard Talk, and I can share with you the realities of the CIA operations, because all the documents have been declassified. And Peter, remember, we supported WikiLeaks in being able to use open source payment technology, Bitcoin, when the financial blockade tried to take it down because it published the truth about the war crimes of America based upon Israeli foreign policy and the 1 million people that were massacred in order to turn on the fact that America had already installed a puppet government called Saddam Hussein into Iraq and used that in order to destabilize Iran by funding his military operation in 1980 in order to invade Iran. And then in 2003, based upon the fake intelligence of Netanyahu, in order to create the fake war on terror, we decided to take out Saddam Hussein, the same person that was militarized. And then that led to the creation of certain groups that were actually Mossad operations and CIA operations anyway, in order to create the fake war on terror to destabilize the region, which was the plan all along. It is one big psyop, Peter Todd, and hopefully you won't fall for it again. Anyway, we will get back to that in the geopolitical section. What else happened in Bitcoin? Well, a project that I was involved with in 2016 through Bank to the Future, the company I co-founded, which essentially was a platform. We were trying to create a full reserve bank. The Bank of England said, no, you can't create a full reserve bank. We can't give you a license for a full reserve bank because then that would destabilize fractional reserve bank Ponzi scheme, which was the debt-based Ponzi scheme that the Bank of England created from 1694 and exported to America in 1913 with the Federal Reserve after the Rothschild banking family had 2 failed attempts and did not get their bank charter renewed. But they eventually won in 1913 and got America bankrupted, just like they got the UK government bankrupted through the Bank of England. But because the Bank of England wouldn't give us our full reserve banking license, we pivoted the business when we discovered Bitcoin, and we got so many of our investors into Bitcoin. When I got my first Bitcoin at $3, and we escaped from the system because the open source code allowed us to create essentially a full reserve bank based upon digital hard sound money. It wasn't a bank. We pivoted to securities, supported the industry, and funded many of the companies that became multi-billion-dollar unicorns now that the regulators are trying to attack in order to hand over the industry to their cronies and the shareholders of the Federal Reserve, like Bank of New York Mellon and BlackRock and JP Morgan. They couldn't beat us, so they joined us, and they used the SEC, which we'll be covering more of today, in order to try and take down many of those companies and support fraudulent companies in becoming multi-billion-dollar ones as well, because they don't care about consumer protection. But in 2016, there was a hack of approximately 119 Bitcoin from an exchange called Bitfinex. I was around when I saw the disastrous impact of the Mt. Gox scheme. When that got hacked, and we didn't want that to happen again, so we supported Bitfinex, and we allowed them. We decided to create a process outside of traditional bankruptcy, and we allowed, using our securities business, for creditors and victims to be able to convert certain tokens into equity. It also gave them entitlement to the Bitcoin if those Bitcoin were ever recovered. So what happened? Those Bitcoins were recovered. And now it was ruled this week that Bitfinex, the company, was ruled the sole victim and eligible to recover Bitcoins worth today approximately $7.4 billion as a result of that hack. Those 119,000 Bitcoins, they were hacked because it created immutable records on the blockchain. The law enforcement can do their job rather than saying, you company, do all the job of law enforcement for us. Law enforcement have to do their job, because when you commit crimes with Bitcoin, you create immutable records on a blockchain. Your identity is pseudonymous. They don't know that it's you, but if you make mistakes and you commit crimes, then they may be able to connect you to that. And the 2 people that created those crimes were Liechtenstein, or was it? And Morgan, the crocodile of Wall Street, the rapper. Hilarious videos if you check them out on Wall Street. But they had all these passports in order to try and escape to Ukraine and all sorts of stuff, use his right to return in Israel and various other things. But they got caught and they got arrested and they are doing their time right now. But anyway, what happened in order to get the recovery while we were doing this is Bank to the Future supported victims in creating a process that meant it did not get crucified by the bankruptcy lawyers, just like happened in Celsius and FTX when they watch last week's episode where I share what happened in FTX, because the lawyers create a scam on a scam. But this time we managed to recover it in record time. So what they essentially did is they socialized the loss and said all of your balances on Bitfinex will be cut by 36%. And we will replace every dollar that we owe you with a token that was launched on top of Bitcoin through the Omni protocol. And that token was called BFX tokens. Those tokens no longer exist. They represented $1 in Bitfinex debt that they promised to repay. They also allowed you to sell those tokens, to redeem them for $1 if they could, if the company started trading again and you got profitable. Or you could exchange them for shares through Bank to the Future through a securities business. And we did that. And so by April 2017, just a few months after, the exchange was back up. It was profitable again. In 2017, the market entered into a bull market, and anybody that had those tokens was able to redeem them for $1. Or in the meantime, they could sell them at a discount if they didn't want to wait. So some people bought up those tokens at 30 cents at its low, and others bought them at a premium at just over $1, but they could be redeemed for $1 and they could be converted into $1 of equity at a deeply discounted valuation to the $15 that Bitfinex ended up buying them back at, and the peak of $16 on the Bank to the Future secondary market, where people were able to sell those shares that they bought for 30 cents at the bottom, and at a peak of $16 on the Bank to the Future secondary market, even outperforming Bitcoin if you got the market timing right. Obviously, not everybody did. But this beat the shit out of traditional bankruptcy. And also, some of those customers that kept those tokens, they opted to be able to receive shares in Bitfinex as well through Bank to the Future, but they also got a bonus recovery right token. These tokens, where if you hold them, it would give you $1 worth of recovery if the Bitcoins were ever returned as well. So these Bitcoins now are returned because the funds are coming back up based upon the ruling. And you will be able to redeem those recovery right tokens as well as on top. And also Bitfinex paid out a percentage of all of their profits as dividends for the early days as well. So you got the redemption, you got the equity, you got the dividend, you got the recovery right token, and basically up to 80%. Now, what happened a few years later is the governments basically it was virtually impossible for Tether, which was a sister company of Bitfinex, to have a bank account. They ended up working with a company called Crypto Capital. Crypto Capital ended up being shut down by the government because they were doing all sorts of things. So those funds that were back in Tether got frozen, not because of Tether, but because Crypto Capital and the bank was essentially doing all sorts of stuff. So Tether ended up having a hole, and they filled it by launching another token. This token was the Leo token. And this time, any funds beyond the recovery right token would be used in order to burn those tokens, and the Bitcoins would be used and returned. And people essentially raised about $1 billion in order to save Tether at that time and purchase those tokens. And so now all of these funds are being returned back. Do they count as the 200,000 Bitcoin that is trying to be used as a Bitcoin strategic reserve asset? Well, we shall see based upon the blockchain data, because we can track those wallets as well. So anyway, as a result of this announcement that happened in the judge ruling that those hacked Bitcoin are going to be coming back to Bitfinex, and that benefits those Leo token holders and the recovery right token holders and Bitfinex shareholders, The Leo token jumped approximately 14% in price. It was issued at about $1, and now it is $6.85 as a result. So it shows you that using tokenized securities through regulated crypto securities businesses like Bank to the Future, you can use innovation in order to beat the crap out of the bankruptcy proceedings, which is just one big money grab. So congratulations to everybody that has those recovery right tokens or ended up supporting the Tether recovery with Leo tokens. And if there is anything left over, you decided, and it is a free market and it is beautiful as well. So very happy with how that ended up working out in the end. What else happened? So what else was announced today? Well, UAE, they announced that they have eliminated taxes on all crypto transactions. Not quite sure what that meant, because within a UAE, I'm pretty sure they don't have capital gains, but maybe when you classify a cryptocurrency, there was some kind of tax, but they have removed those, which means that it is a lot easier to use Bitcoin as legal tender if you want to in the end, or use it as a currency because you don't incur taxable events if the price of Bitcoin goes up when you're spending them. Unlike in America and other jurisdictions like UK, where when you spend them and the price goes up, you may need to report a gain. This is not tax advice, but jurisdictions are deciding, rather than being Bitcoin unfriendly, let's bring all the business over to our jurisdictions by being Bitcoin friendly, as El Salvador is doing, as UAE is doing, and any country that wants to create an industry around Bitcoin is most welcome to do it. The other ones that want to leave it classified as property, well, then they benefit from Bitcoin by having a taxable event which supports the IRS in the case of the US, or HMRC in the case of the UK, which means that they are better off joining the community. And that's why we had the approval of Bitcoin ETF and the complete transfer of trying to persuade you to store your Bitcoin with BlackRock instead of storing it in self-custody. But you're going to be smarter than that. And if not, next year, I'm going to be doing my Bitcoin Wealth Builder program that I do every 4 years. If you are not on the mailing list on Bitcoin on simondixon.com, then make sure you have applied to join that as well. It's a free program for those that are making certain investments in our industry. And we'll be revealing more details next year. Looking forward to do for that as well. And we'll make sure you know how to self-custody and how to protect yourself, because self-custody of Bitcoin is when you boycott the Federal Reserve, the proof of weapons network, and none of that fiat currency, or all of that fiat currency, whatever you decide to allocate, gets converted to Bitcoin, exits the system, and you hold it in self-custody. So you are not supporting the wars that the Federal Reserve was created in order to support. The judge at the FTX bankruptcy, remember, we've covered this many times, I'm not going to cover it again. They dollarized the claim where instead of getting a Bitcoin back, they gave you $16,000 back. And then they say you get a high recovery because the Bitcoin price goes up. And they say, well, based upon locking Bitcoin in at $16,000, the price of Bitcoin goes up to $60,000. They steal all that upside, hand it over to venture capitalists and shareholders that created the crimes in the first place, or were supporting the crimes in the first place anyway, and then pretend that FTX creditors had a good result like was done in 2016 for Bitfinex shareholders. Well, anyway, the judge has ruled and approved the FTX bankruptcy plan. And so you will be based upon a Bitcoin price of $16,000, even though the current Bitcoin price is $62,000. You will be repaid in dollars, and you will get 2 years worth of interest, so 118% returns. But that cash can be used in order to buy back Bitcoin again. They're going to be distributing, not immediately, but about $16 billion worth of claims, and it will be settled in USD. Now, that doesn't mean that that's $16 billion worth of crypto buying, because many people sold their claims to claims buyers, and claims buyers may not necessarily be Bitcoin people that understand this, but hopefully they do. And maybe there will be a big injection of liquidity from that distribution to buy back that Bitcoin. You see the inefficiency of these Chapter 11 processes. They take beautiful hard money. They use it to bamboozle you into thinking you're getting 100% recovery. They sell that Bitcoin. They give you dollars, which is very hard to get through on the proof of weapons network to all of those millions of creditors. And then you use it to buy back Bitcoin anyway, because that's what you wanted in the first place. And everybody gets cuts and fees, and they get to build another company to manage those funds for the next 5 years. Anyway, $16 billion is coming back in. It may not necessarily come back to buy Bitcoin. Smaller creditors will get paid first, those that have claims less than $50,000. And then there's about another $9 billion that will likely be distributed early next year if you are an FTX creditor. Thankfully, I was not an FTX creditor, never used the exchange, because I was deeply skeptical how this person, SBF, that came out of nowhere and was suddenly implanted into our industry. I was like, where the hell was this guy all along pre-2017? He just suddenly came on and everybody was creating videos like he's been around from the beginning, even though I'd never heard of him, even though I was around and none of the other people had. So I was very skeptical about it as well. Well, he also got his co-founder to create a hedge fund or take over the hedge fund, which was Alameda Research. And Caroline Ellison this week basically settled with FTX. And it was ruled that she has to return the funds that she got paid from FTX, which it didn't say the exact amounts, but I think it was about $22 million from the information that I could find. We shall see what the final settlement is when it is published in the bankruptcy court as well. Hopefully, this gives an indication of what will happen to Alex Mashinsky, which stole a lot of money from creditors, and he is having his court case early next year. And the 6 right to return people, the 5, that are hiding out in Israel, and the 1 person that's hiding out in Germany, hopefully this is an indication that all of the money that they stole, and Nuke Goldstein, speaking to you, CTO, which bought a $4 million house, which is in the middle of the hurricanes right now. Hopefully that house does not get taken down in the hurricane, because that money should come back to the victims that you scammed in the first place, while you are using your right to return to hide out in Israel, using your dual citizenship so that you don't get convicted for your crimes. Well, we know that there is a house that you bought with creditors' money, and hopefully this is an indication. What happened to Caroline Ellison will also happen to the scam artists that created the $24 billion Ponzi scheme that led to the loss of $3 billion of creditors' money. And we will find out what happens to them next year. At the same time, as a result of the SEC allowing these multi-billion-dollar Ponzi schemes, even though they were investigating them and giving SBF meetings, the only person that would get a meeting with the SEC and Gary Gensler, despite that, they still allowed them to get huge, which crashed the industry. And then immediately, the Fed said, we keep interest rates low. And, remember the whole inflation is transitory. Oops. No, it's not transitory. Hiked the market, killed the banks that were supporting the crypto industry, took Operation Choke Point 2.0 to not give any banking license to anybody that wanted to work with crypto companies, and at the same time approving their traditional financial players to take over the industry so that they could persuade you to put all of your Bitcoin with them. Well, the $10 trillion asset manager BlackRock says that crypto is being adopted faster than the internet and mobile phones. So they are pushing the Bitcoin network. But remember, take what they're saying. But remember, they didn't want to be involved in our industry. And Larry Fink, when he didn't think he could beat it, he was saying this is a scam just for drug dealers. And then eventually had to join it because he is also knows that there is something up with the proof of weapons network and needs to plan the hedging strategy. And that strategy is to persuade you to store your Bitcoin with them through the ETF. And then the government creates all tax incentives to do it, and takes out traditional players, does Operation Choke Point 2.0, hikes rate, breaks the pro-crypto banks like Silicon Valley Bank and Signature and Silvergate. And then suddenly, BlackRock, you're approved. And suddenly, no banks can custody Bitcoin, but you, Bank of New York Mellon, you get an exemption. and then goes on TV and says, everybody buy Bitcoin safely through the New York Stock Exchange, through the BlackRock ETF, and later it will be custodied because we're going to now sue Coinbase, even though they were the most regulated company in the industry with the best track record of storing people's Bitcoin, with customers that hate them because they're so compliant. And instead, we'll sue them, and then we'll give an exemption to Bank of New York Mellon. Well, more and more Bitcoin companies are now going public as well. Fold, which was a company that we were going to raise finance for them on Bank to the Future. They decided to go the public route. We didn't end up doing the pre-IPO offering anyway, but they filed their S4 forms with the SEC. And this moves them one step closer to being another public company like Coinbase and like all the other Bitcoin mining companies. Bank to the Future, we will be launching the ability to trade these public companies shortly next year as well, on top of being able to buy Bitcoin, stake ETH, and the private equity, which was our bread and butter to support the industry. And many of our investors benefited from these companies growing to multi-billion-dollar unicorns, while others collapsed as well. So what about the other industry? Well, one of the companies we didn't support was Crypto.com. Crypto.com was in the limelight this week because they received a Wells notice. A Wells notice means a pre-warning and the ability for Crypto.com to report and report back before. Normally 30 days later, either the DOJ or the SEC will be publicly suing Crypto.com. So they received that Wells notice from the SEC. And at the same time, Crypto.com fired a counter lawsuit against the SEC, saying that they want to protect the future of crypto in the US and that the SEC is acting as a bad actor. At the same time, the FBI decided it was going to create its own cryptocurrency token, and it was revealed the token was called Next Fund AI, and the FBI used this token pump and dump scheme in order to catch 18 suspects for fraud and market manipulation. And so the FBI is willing to create tokens in order to test the 18 people whether they would be engaged in wash trading and other sinister activities. Wash trading is a great thing to be taken away because wash trading was always a problem in our industry. Basically, scammy exchanges were pretending they had loads of volume by putting together buyers and sellers on a centralized database, pretending that the volume was bigger than it is in order to spoof and trick investors into using scammy exchanges. Coming after wash trading is a good thing because we need real data, not fake data. So this is a type of thing that regulation should do. And this is the type of thing that we want regulators to do when there is centralized companies. It doesn't change that Bitcoin is decentralized and doesn't need regulating. But when you swap your Bitcoin for Bitcoin at an exchange, then you have a promise to repay that Bitcoin, and that promise to repay is controlled by centralized actors, and those centralized actors should be tested and regulating so they don't defraud people like the countless hacks that happened in our industry. This is something the SEC should be doing and should be coming after, and so these types of regulations I welcome, but it is interesting the lengths that the FBI is willing to go to launch a scam and catch the people engaging in the scam as well. But anyway, anything that eliminates wash trading gives us better data, and that is a good thing. The SEC commissioner also came out and admitted that their approach to crypto and their regulations has been an absolute disaster for the whole industry. But we know why, because they were enacting the corrupt policy of the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve is optimizing the industry, not for America. Their job is to fund wars, get the US government deep in debt, $36 trillion of debt now, and then transition to a new power structure or launch a CBDC to turn America from capitalism to communism, based upon getting the American government deep in debt and using crony capitalism like the SEC that is not necessarily protecting investors, because it's enacting regulation by enforcement, because the shareholders of the Federal Reserve are who? The banks. The banks that created the system in the first place and pretend that they are supporting the US economy. And so they were acting basically for their shareholders. And at the same time, what happened this week as well? Well, the SEC decided to sue Cumberland. Now, Cumberland are a good actor in our industry from everything that I've seen so far. They've tried to follow regulations. They've been reaching out to the SEC. But only SBF managed to get a meeting because he was laundering money through for Ukraine, the Republican Party, and the Democrat Party. And so therefore he gets a meeting and he was the only one. Whereas Cumberland couldn't get a meeting with the SEC. They said that they wanted the SEC. They wrote to the SEC for guidance. And the only guidance that they got was that they can only make a market in ETH and Bitcoin. And everything else is ambiguous, because if we want to come after you, we'll come after you and say that you're making a market in securities without that license. This is all basically, corruption in order to direct the industry as they want, guised as supporting and protecting investors. Cumberland only work with institutional players. This isn't a retail business. They've been in business, since the 90s, doing this for multiple markets. So why is it so different when you're engaging in this asset class? They are a market maker. Market makers provide liquidity over wash trading. This is real liquidity if you have real buyers and sellers, and it creates cheaper fees for investors. I used to be a market maker when I worked on the London Stock Exchange. I left in approximately 2006 because, market makers do engage in shenanigans like manipulating prices. I worked on the alternative investment market on the London Stock Exchange in my investment banking days. I left because they do manipulate markets, but the more market makers there are, the more liquidity, the more harder it is to manipulate markets, like wash trading and the things you are coming after with the fake pump and dump schemes. Now, because there is no sufficient regulations, I was on a space today where there were some claims as well that because of the non-effective regulations of market makers, hedge funds are paying about 50% of them that engage in this industry. They're trading crypto. And if they don't allow for market makers and competitive market makers where you want thousands of them, this is just pushing up the price and fees, which doesn't protect consumers in the end. So USD to Bitcoin is 3 times more expensive than USDT to Bitcoin. And that is all because of these crony regulations that don't support consumers because there is no clarity around them. There was no allegations of investor harm in this lawsuit at all. And all it does is it pulls liquidity. At the same time, there was another lawsuit. This is what you get with the Biden administration, rather than, some good things, but mostly bad things and a lot of corruption as well. Bitnomial was another SEC lawsuit. They're suing the SEC because all they wanted to do was create XRP futures. I mean, I have no idea why anyone would want to trade XRP futures. 60% of the coins is owned by Ripple Labs. Ripple Labs, full disclosure, years ago I invested in the company. I don't own any XRP tokens. I think it's an awful token personally, but I believe in free markets and everybody should be able to make their own mistakes if they want. Not financial advice, but the judge ruled that it's not a security, and so they wanted to create an XRP future. Although the offering, the original sales by Ripple Labs, the company, of XRP, the tokens, was considered a securities offering, the ruling that it wasn't was that XRP is not a security. So they used that case, which was a judge ruling, and, the SEC lost that case. So XRP, the token, is not considered a security when it is going through secondary trades or programmatic trades, it was called. Now, what happens? Well, the SEC decided we don't care what the judge ruled. We're basically going to say, here's the evidence that we submitted in the case. We're going to file it against you. And they're just saying it is a security because we say it is, even though the judge ruled it. What is going on there? We all know that this is all about lobby groups shifting money in the right places. And rather than regulation, they're actually picking winners and losers, which is not what the SEC's meant to be doing. In the meantime, the public company MicroStrategy, Michael Saylor released more on what the strategy for MicroStrategy is. MSTR, that will be a company that will be tradable on Bank to the Future when we launch, for those that want to trade in public shares as well. They launched their end game, or they revealed their end game, which we speculated about many times over the years on Bitcoin Hard Talk podcast. And that is that it wants to be a financial institution for doing Bitcoin-backed loans so that people can put Bitcoin up as collateral, borrow against it, and leverage up, and much like the treasury management service that MicroStrategy does, and basically create a $1 trillion company is their aspirations. Not financial advice or whether they achieve it, but this is the goal. So this is basically MicroStrategy today announced it, and the stock went up over 11% on the news. And this is a way of justifying the fact that MicroStrategy holds a lot of Bitcoin in reserves. It typically trades about 2.5 times the Bitcoin's reserves that it holds, and it has to justify those by having a business. It has a software business that buys those Bitcoin, and they can borrow against it to lever up those Bitcoin. I am no fan of leverage. I just like cold, hard Bitcoin in Bitcoin cold storage with no messing around, no custody. But this is the strategy that is being revealed. And if they can create a Bitcoin regulated bank, which is a very different business, lots and lots of regulations, then that is how MicroStrategy might become that $1 trillion company that they aspire to become. I mean, it's been an amazing story of using Bitcoin in order to outperform most of the stocks on S&P. I think the only one they didn't outperform was Nvidia, and that's because it was involved in the whole AI infrastructure play, which is great. Okay, right. We're going to move on to the macro section. That's everything for this news in Bitcoin this week. I'm going to take a quick water break to recover my voice. I'll only be a few seconds. Do me a favor. While I am doing that, can you please like, share, repost, add a comment below this video? YouTube will not give us any algorithm. Space relies upon, X relies upon you to share this. So please do that. I give this content for free every week. I want you to stay up to date, but I rely upon you in order to share and bring as many people in. So why don't you do that? Hit the like button, hit the bell symbol under the subscribe button if you want to subscribe. All of this helps more people find the content to be more prepared. I'm going to take a quick water break. Do that right now and hit that like button, subscribe, share, retweet, repost. Okay, we're moving into the second segment, the macro section. So what happened this week in the macro section? Well, the CPI print, the consumer price index in the US, it came in and it was 2.4%. So the target is 2%, but 2.4% was slightly above expectations of 2.3%. And so therefore we had a slight rally in the stock market, a slight rally in the Bitcoin market, nothing to really talk about. But it shows that even though they are reducing the rates, the Federal Reserve is captured and implementing policies on behalf of the lobby groups and the bank lobby, because they have decided who the next president of the United States is in these fake democracies where we know that intelligence agencies decide who the winners are on behalf of the Fed, on behalf of the Fed shareholders. So they look like they are giving a gift to Harris because they reduce rates to 0.5%, pump the Ponzi scheme in order to push up the price of stocks and real estate at the expense of those that are indebted and don't hold any assets. And even though it was pushing down those rates, inflation came in slightly higher than expected. And obviously the geopolitical situation means that the whole world, because of these central banks, has become so centralized that we are at the mercy of psychopaths and hidden agendas and intelligence agencies that are executing regime changes that we'll cover more in the geopolitical section for the future of our markets. There is no free markets. There are Fed markets, and there are deeply centralized markets, no free market as well. So this means that we will likely get, after the election, a gift if they have chosen Harris to be the leader. Then if Harris is the next leader, I'm not sure if it's Trump or Harris yet. We shall see in the next 30 days, and we can read between the tea leaves and make some predictions there. But it is likely in November that there will be further cuts and there will be more inflation as well. And so, again, that creates that financial apartheid that punishes those that don't have assets for those that do have assets, because they can't have a recession. And a recession is defined by the stock market, by GDP, and by the real estate market as well, which benefits the banks, of course. So the Fed is compromised. It is not doing anything, and it's always been compromised. It was created by the very same banksters that created the Bank of England in order to bankrupt the US government anyway. So it looks like they're choosing Harris based upon Fed policy, and Bloomberg made a roaring mistake, which led to a pump and dump in the Chinese stock market. Remember, we covered this in previous episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk, but Bloomberg basically got the news completely wrong. China, or an organization connected to China stocks, they basically came out and confirmed that the translation by Bloomberg was completely accurate around the stimulus. They are not doing any quantitative easing in order to try and stimulate the market. They are not expanding their balance sheet in order to push up the real estate market. And people should not be speculating on stocks. As a result of that, there was about a 10% drop in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange after an approximately 30% pump when that news was misreported by Bloomberg. This led to the shift and change of about $50 billion of equities that changed in that as a result of that article, which redistributed wealth from the hands of one group to another group. And this was the highest transfer of stock in one day in the Chinese markets. Just shows what you can do when you have centralized control rather than markets through central banks and PBOC. Yesterday, if you didn't watch it, on the macro side, Tesla came out and they were demonstrating an unbelievable technology. It is incredible what is happening with artificial intelligence and robotics, but it all leads to less jobs. That's why in the Bitcoin Wealth Builder program, we're always preparing people to protect themselves from central bank digital currencies through Bitcoin and to replace their job income with portfolio income through some of the different investments and various others to protect yourself as we shift from a world dominated by Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs. And never was that more prevalent than what Tesla had on show yesterday. They demonstrated the robo vans that are going to take all of the bus drivers' jobs, all of the truck drivers' jobs, all of the taxi drivers' jobs, all of the robo cards, all of the robots that will be used and everyone will have in their house. This industry is moving really, really fast. And I think people have approximately 5 years to protect themselves because things are moving at a rapid pace. But the important part about this is what is behind all of this artificial intelligence. Well, it's data centers, just like Bitcoin, large super distributed supercomputers. Bitcoin mining and AI are merging their industries, but AI requires a lot more energy and data than Bitcoin. And so this is an energy play. The amount of energy that is required in order to power all of this artificial intelligence, which requires gas. And gas plays into the geopolitical side because it's extracted from, using gas in order to power a lot of this electricity, which is powering a lot of this artificial intelligence, which is why the geopolitical situation needs to stabilize, because these chips are being created in Taiwan, if China is being pushed into reunification by the geopolitical situation and NATO try to expand, then that is pushing for a reunification, which could constrict the chips industry, which could have massive impact on all of this artificial intelligence. And also, it is required as we transition to electricity, there is still a massive need for oil as well. Now, remember the current situation as Israel and Iran, we'll cover more of that in the geopolitical section. But one thing they could do is Israel could decide to interfere in the US election. They could give Trump a gift by destroying the economy. So if Trump is the chosen one, which is why, by the way, look at the last couple of weeks, Trump has been begging the Israeli lobby, doing his October the 7th tributes, going out to making promise that he'll annex Gaza, putting lots of anti-Iran comments so that they can support the regime change in Iran and the war in Iran, even though he says he's anti-war, and going out to, did you see all those hostage shots where he was saying, do you want me to sign the book now? Do you want me to do this now? Tell me what I need to do, but just make sure that the Israeli lobby gives me my position as the next president of the United States. But if the Israeli lobby wanted to do that, then they could get very aggressive. Now, at the time of this recording right now, there could even have been a retaliation, because I'm not watching the live news, by Israel on Iran. Now, if they wanted to change the market and shift the market, 90% of Iran's oil is exported through the Kaj Island. Sorry if I've said that incorrectly. And so if you want to send the market into carnage for temporarily during this election, then that's how Israel could demonstrate that Trump is the chosen one and not Harris. Obviously, they hedge both bets because you can see that America and Congress are all behind Israel with the exception of a tiny, tiny percentage, despite the fact that the people aren't, and this is costing them votes. It's clear to me that lobbies are more important than votes because Trump doesn't need your vote and Harris doesn't need your vote because the CIA, the Fed, the Bank of England, and intelligence agencies through lobby groups have already decided who the chosen one is for the next American election. But anyway, this could raise, if you were to raise oil prices, they're hovering around 70%. They hiked up based upon the news that Biden said you should go after the oil rigs. And then when Biden reversed that, they came back down to about $72. This could hike them up to approximately $80. And that is the same rate that created the hyperinflationary cycle that led to the crash and the Fed crashing the markets and the Silicon Valley bank run, and that was executed by a few people, creating that bank run that I've covered in many other episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk. This could create bad markets, more inflation, and basically it would constrict the $1 billion a barrel of oil that Iran is looking to export as a result of that. It also could lead to a retaliation by the Houthis. The Houthis could decide that they're coming after some of the Saudi Arabian oil fields like they did in 2019. And this could make Biden look really bad and lead to a Trump election as well, despite the fact that this could be really bad for Americans. At the same time as Americans printing money from the Federal Reserve, which $9 billion goes to Ukraine, $9 billion goes to Israel. And during these hurricanes, they haven't got any money for Americans, which are dying as a result of natural disasters. The true face of who the Federal Reserve represents and the government compromising through intelligence agencies means they no longer serve American people. This is not a democracy, and this should not be exported globally through these covert regime change that the governments are trying to scam us into believing is right now. So I guess this would point to Israel choosing Harris. If we get a slow escalation, if we get an aggressive escalation, then maybe Israel has chosen Trump and all of the good work he did this week, begging to the Israeli lobby to allow him to be the next president. Maybe played in. This will only be temporary during this election because OPEC, which mainly is Saudi Arabia, but also has Russia, Iran involved strategically as well, they want to cut oil reserves and they want to, basically contract prices to keep down inflation as well. But there is the geopolitical situation with Iraq. So Iraq has occupied territory, illegally occupied by America. It had a regime change that led to CIA and Mossad controlled operations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They occupied part of those. They fight against Iran. Iran has their resistance movements against occupation like Hamas and Hezbollah. The traditional media paints a different picture, but Iraq is still exporting above their quota from OPEC, which is a counter resistance with the price of oil as well. So we could get, depending on the situation, if we don't get peace movements towards peace in the Middle East, is Iran could counterattack the low down retaliation from Israel, and it could go after US bases in Iraq, and Iraq could decide to continue and violate some of those the OPEC agreements, and this could create a price war in the Middle East where they don't comply with the quotas, and this could compensate for whatever happens to Iran right now. And in fact, this did happen in 2019. There was massive sanctions. They couldn't export oil, and it was able to compensate through Iraq and then various different types of things as well. This is why Israel, acting like a madman, trying to escalate all these wars to execute CIA's covert regime change, is not a good idea, and it will impact people as well. Also, it means that Iraq could decide that they wanted to keep Harris by increasing its quota, or it could decide that it wants to support Trump. So this is how these elections are controlled when you centralize everything through central banks and install puppet regimes like Saudi Arabia, where a kingdom with a puppet government that supports US ends up controlling the price of oil, and you have resistance against it by destabilizing and toppling the region. These are all the side impacts. We no longer have free markets. We have deep centralization. And thank you, Satoshi Nakamoto, who in 2008 created Bitcoin as a resistance movement against the centralized central banking proof of weapons network. Anyway, so that's kind of the current situation that is happening right now. And I will keep updating you throughout the week, and I'll cover it next week when we know exactly what does happen. But what could be a retaliation from Iran? Well, Iran could decide to go after Israel's gas exports because Israel has been trying to become energy independent, which is the real reason why they want to create these routes and execute regime change in Iran, because this gas that Israel exports for electricity supplies, Egypt relies upon Israel for 14% of its gas that comes from Israel. Jordan relies upon Israel for 70% of its gas. Why do you think Jordan and Egypt, who are bribed by economic hitmen at the International Monetary Fund, as well as Lebanon, where the economy is destroyed in Egypt, destroyed in Jordan, destroyed in Lebanon by the economic hitmen at the IMF, create hyperinflation through excessive debts, create refugee crisis by pushing out all the Palestinians into Jordan, and they tried to push out all the Palestinians through ethnic cleansing from Gaza into the Sinai Desert in Egypt in order to topple those regimes as well. I get my words wrong, someone. Detopple, I think that's not the right way of saying it. But anyway, they can use gas in order to create a retaliation, because those countries which are occupied by the IMF and are protecting the sky for Israel, when Iran does precision targets at those military operations, and the media portrays them as something that is completely not. Okay. And also Gaza, unfortunately, relies on Israel 100% because remember, it is a blockade. They pretend like they retreated in 2006, but they control all resources. They control the sky. They control the sea. And one of the first tools for the genocide to hide it, when they try to pretend that Hamas is the same as ISIS, and ISIS are the real terrorists that behead people, and those are controlled by CIA and Mossad operations. Basically, they cut off all the power, which was a tool for genocide, to create famine and don't let any food in, various other things. And so they had to resist by creating solar infrastructure for their electricity. And guess what? Israel just blows it all up as well. And so that is a tool that is being used as a result of the complete control of Gaza through the blockade, the genocide, and the ethnic cleansing. Okay, so what else is happening on the macro side? Well, remember as well that China obviously relies upon oil from both Iran and Russia, which is why the US is starting to sanction China, because China needs that oil. And because China needs that oil, it has to ally with its neighbors, and its neighbors are Iran and Russia as well. And so it has been buying a lot of oil. When the price went up, that is what allowed Iran and Russia to fund their resistance and their support, in the case of Iran, for the Palestinian cause, and in the case of Russia, the invasion as a result of NATO expansion in violation to all the peace treaties by NATO that led to the end of the Cold War. But China has been building up massive oil reserves. In fact, China has large oil reserves for a strategic point. It also has 25,000 tons of gold that is building up in order to be politically important in the new BRICS cryptocurrency that we're going to be covering next. So China could decide if it wants to play nice and either control the US economy and create a banking crisis again, as it did, as Russia did with Saudi Arabia after the invasion by Russia into Ukraine. The whole situation could be created by China deciding how it wants to release those reserves as well. So it could withdraw strategically from those reserves and make a resistance movement if Saudi Arabia decides to go too in favor of the West. Saudi Arabia relies upon America for its defense, and the reason that all of this regime change is happening is because America wants to support Israel as a proxy militia in order to support the stabilization of the dollar by making sure that Saudi Arabia continues to sell its oil in dollars, creating that demand for the dollars, and making sure that the Middle East can never unify, which is why you got the IMF and those economic hitmen. Saudi has approximately 5 billion of spare capacity. And so this could be countered after the election. But the closer we get to the election, oil can be used as a financial weapon of mass destruction in these currency wars in order to determine whether Israel has chosen Harris or Trump. We shall see. All around the world, central banks are basically lowering rates, which creates the same inflationist transitory environment that we saw in 2022, where the Fed can just suddenly hike rates and wipe the economy out if it wants to do, like it did in 33, when it created the pump in the 29 roaring 20s, and then the Great Depression by hiking rates after creating an environment of low rates, which allowed the shareholders of the Federal Reserve, the banks, to take over and take 20,000 banks, wipe them into 10,000 banks, and buy stocks at an 80% discount and consolidate power for the Federal Reserve shareholders, and get America deeper into debt through the FDR reforms and making gold illegal and making Americans hand in all their gold in exchange for $20 at the Federal Reserve. So anyway, we will look for the price of oil. Oil will tell us, and it could spike, and that could cause a banking withdrawal run on the banks like last time. But what do we need to do? We need to watch out for the BRICS summit. BRICS summit is approximately 1.5 weeks away. There will be very important announcements at the BRICS summit. So I want to make sure that you understand how the BRICS cryptocurrency works. So we're going to be covering the BRICS cryptocurrency, then we'll do the geopolitical section. And so if you are enjoying this, please do me a favor. I'm going to take a quick sip of water. Like, share, retweet, repost, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, hit all, and make sure, open an alternative browser, go to simondixon.com and make sure you get ready to create a free membership there, so I can keep you up to date with everything as it happens and get you ready for transitioning to a world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs so you can replace your earned income with portfolio income in case AI takes your jobs, and you can protect yourself from the oppression of CBDCs that will take away life, liberty, and freedom, as it has for many that are on the wrong side of the proof of weapons network, by protecting yourself with Bitcoin in self-custody and managing a responsible transition. Hit that button. I'm going to take a quick water and we're going to jump right into the BRICS white paper and how it's going to function and what the attack vectors may be. Okay, so I dug into the BRICS white paper to understand what it is. Is it a CBDC? Is it a cryptocurrency? Is it a stable coin? Well, it's none of the above, and I'll help you understand what it is and how it works and what the attack vectors might be. So firstly, there will be a token. The token is called the unit token. This is going to be a unit of account, and it is going to be what they're describing as an apolitical currency. And so the idea is that there is no one centralized issuer like a CBDC or a central bank. In fact, it will be a group of all the BRICS members, and the more members they are, the more nodes there are, and the more nodes there are, the better the governance is in terms of no centralized control. But just like when Bitcoin started, only Satoshi Nakamoto was mining. In this network, initially it will be the 5 BRIC members plus the additional ones. So you've got Russia, you've got China, you've got India, you've got South Africa. Who else am I missing? And Brazil. And then the additional members, which is Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, UAE, and Saudi Arabia, kind of sitting in the middle because they control they want to sit in the middle and decide what the future of the petrodollar looks like. Is it priced in BRICS through the unit, or is it priced in dollars, or are they going to do both and slowly transition and play both sides of the equation and make them incredibly one kingdom, one person, and one country with no democracy that has all the human rights violation of Iran, but America decides to ignore and pretend that they only care about the protecting women's rights in Iran, because they want to make sure Saudi Arabia controls everything with the Federal Reserve, so that this can all be replaced with one global currency, CBDC, after World War III, that the military-industrial complex will profit from. Well, anyway, what else do we know about the BRICS unit token? Well, it's going to be a store of value. So what's going to make its value? Is it going to be fluctuating like a cryptocurrency? No, it's going to have a backing, and that should mean that it doesn't go below that. But what also creates the demand for the unit? Well, the unit will be a payment system on the retail level, and it will be an imports and exports unit on the settlement level between BRICS members as well. And so the idea is that there is long-term purchasing power and stability by backing it by certain assets as well. Basically, it is meant to solve the problem in the white paper of the lack of trust. One central bank, and what happened to Russia, where America can just delete its treasuries, or what happened to Venezuela. The Bank of England just said, your gold is not your gold because it's stored with us. and what will happen to Argentina. Now, Milei decided to take Argentina's gold and store it in London and transport it to the Rothschild and Co. And also depend upon the Federal Reserve by closing its central bank and replacing it with the policy of the Fed. Argentina is 100% dependent upon the Fed and the gold at the Bank of England as well. So this is meant to solve that problem. Now, remember, Argentina decided to unjoin BRICS. It was making an application as soon as Milei came into power. So very much showing a dollar bias rather than a BRICS multipolar world as well. And that is because obviously Milei was the chosen one as well. And they never talk about all the assassinations that happened in Mexico and Argentina in order to politically interfere in that. We're not meant to talk about that anyway, because, hey, it's just Mexico and Argentina anyway. It is meant to be a solution to basically politicians using currency for political means and create an environment where there is a certain level of trustlessness. Now, it's not Bitcoin. Bitcoin has its own currency. It's not backed by gold or anything because it is backed by the largest distributed supercomputer, the ability to self-custody, the ability to operate without any governments or any banks or any central banks. This is actually for governments to create a network where it could be that their central bank is a node operator or their government is a node operator. It allows for different ideologies of financial systems. Now, the technology actually looked like a crazy ICO. They raised about 1,000 Bitcoin in order to build the technology and bootstrap the network, according to the website. But it's going to be backed by a basket of assets. And the idea is that if it ever trades below that basket of assets, that creates an arbitrage to get gold on the cheap. And then market makers should be able to essentially stabilize that based upon the basket of assets that it's backed by. So what is it going to be backed by? Well, it's not a stable coin because it's not backed by dollars or treasuries or one particular unit. It's backed by a basket. So it doesn't function as a stable coin. So the idea is that it's expected never to go below the basket value, and it will publish the basket value. And just like when USDC stablecoin, when it had about $6 billion, it was at Silicon Valley Bank, and Silicon Valley Bank went bust, it depegged from the price because the asset value went down. But when Silicon Valley Bank got guaranteed as a bailout and handed over to the shareholders of the Federal Reserve, it went back to its asset value. This is meant to be the idea behind the unit of BRICS as well. And so a big part of the backing is gold. And the tokens will be tradable into gold as well. So they'll have a market where you can trade the unit token into gold, and it will be backed 40% by gold. Why is that? Because they don't want it where there's not, governments aren't able to exert monetary policy in their own currency in order to increase the number of units as they want to participate for more imports and exports, because maybe they don't have full control over gold reserves. So it's 40% gold and 60% by the member currencies, which creates a liquidity pool of all of the different member currencies, which can increase the demand for units as you want to engage in more imports and exports with BRIC members. And so, but it does not mention which blockchain it will actually use. And so that is an open question. Now, remember, please go back to my episode of Bitcoin Hard Talk where I discussed Venezuela and BlackRock and the failed experiment of the petro when Venezuela tried to do this on their own, backed by units of oil. By having all of the BRICS members use it and become node operators, and this can solve some of the problems that wasn't solved by the petro and that pump and dump scheme that happened as a result. And also they said originally they were going to use the NEM blockchain, and then they pivoted to Ethereum, and then they used the Dash blockchain and created their own version and forked it, which is a privacy coin, so there was no transparency. And then suddenly they just closed it at the end of it. That's called a scam that Venezuela did there as well. But they're calling this distributed ledger technology. So it's not going to use a blockchain. This means essentially transactions will be approved by node operators. And so if initially there are 10 node operators, which are the members of BRICS, those 10 node operators all control or hold copies of all of the transactions and get almost like a share or voting right in the network, so that it is, you have to have more cooperation between those members in order to change anything. This creates more of an environment where if a couple of the members are involved in geopolitical turmoil, they can't change the rules on their own. They can't do what America did, where they delete the assets that Russia was holding. And it's meant to create an environment of diplomacy rather than financial weapons of mass destruction. Now, obviously, it could be backed by Bitcoin if it wanted into the future as well. And so Bitcoin can serve as a mechanism for regulating it, or just creating an exit if it's tradable against Bitcoin. And so exit the entire system kind of regulates the distributed ledger, could regulate the distributed ledger technology as well. It could also create an environment where central banks that issue their own central bank digital currencies, which could be part of the backing, have to be more honest because they could participate in a partial distributed ledger technology with node operators, where eventually, if sanctions are reversed, everyone could end up having to work together. This creates competition amongst currencies, where the most oppressive central bank digital currencies become the worst assets, and the best central bank digital currencies, backed by the best collateral, like gold or Bitcoin, could end up being the ones, and if they have less freedom or more freedom, could be the ones that decide to be in this fair governance structure rather than using regime tames and financial weapons of mass destruction and the IMF. It could create market-driven forces. Now, do I think all of this will happen? Who knows? But this is something that I'd love to see happen as a solution for fiat currencies. And that's not mean I invest, but then you can have a voluntary gold reserve and competing currencies. We could have a free banking system as we transition to the new world order, because competition is good. And it ends these hegemony US dollar currency wars that is causing so much destruction and removing democracy from America and replacing it by hidden secret covert operations by the CIA using Israel as foreign policy that is causing so many problems and taking us to World War III for the profits of the Federal Reserve and Bank of England and European Central Bank being used as a weapon of mass destruction. And we'll cover more of that on the geopolitical side as well. So the question then says, who will be the nodes and how will the gold be stored? These are attack vectors. And so these are all important things to structure as this network grows. But the members and the node operators are going to be everybody that agrees to join the system and join BRICS as well. Now, what they're going to do, rather than agreeing to put the gold part of the portion in one country, like Rothschild in the Bank of England, or Fort Knox in the Federal Reserve, everybody will hold their own gold in their own country. So the 40% gold backing will be distributed across all the members based upon the units that they will be subscribing to, that they can purchase by agreeing to store some of that gold and some of that currency backing in a distributed autonomous organization, a DAO as well. But there is always attack vectors when you pull real world assets to digital units as well. So these will be some of the attack vectors. And as the network grows, I'll be reporting on all of these things. But they agree to essentially do an audit of the gold reserves, and they will have to be organized under a special structure governed by a DAO, which will be governed by the node operators as well. Now, I'm not saying that that's the perfect structure, but real world assets is a thing that many people are looking at, how you can use oracles and various different things. And I will dig deeper into this technology as the network gets closer and closer. So now you can see it's not really a stable coin because it's not backed by one fiat currency. There is no mechanism to reverse conversion. And so you can't, like a stable coin, you can redeem your Tether or you can redeem your USDC. That reduces the number of units and you end up getting the dollars back. But this creates a demand for units because you can't do the reverse. The only thing you can do is trade your units into gold in a market for unit to gold. And so it could probably be unit to Bitcoin as well. This is convertibility. And so it could be converted into the basket of assets as well. And so because it can only be converted into gold or through other markets, it's not really a cryptocurrency either, because it's a distributed ledger technology with the different nodes operators. It doesn't go speculating off to its own price, because essentially it is pegged, and if functioning correctly, the floor is the value of the underlying assets. It's not a central bank digital currency, as it's not created by a central bank. But countries, if they want to have their own central banks, they could make their currency its own central bank digital currency. And so just like the Enbridge network, which kind of creates a network for central bank digital currency, but that is created by the Bank for International Settlements, which is a Rothschild bank, like the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England, designed for the shareholders of the banks. This creates distributed ledger technology, and the aim with the unit is that it is minted based upon the supply and demand as well for that unit, which it can only be done by the node operators. So this could be the first case of distributed ledger technology doing something interesting. We shall see, and I will keep progress on this, because I think moving to a free banking model and a competing market where you have Bitcoin, BRICS, and dollars makes the dollar a better currency and prevent some of these geopolitical suicide by intelligence agencies that just want to create World War III for the military-industrial complex. Maybe it can create more peace in the world. We shall see, and we will keep watching. But the dollar won't like it. This is not going to be a simple thing. It will use sanctions and all sorts of financial weapons and mass destruction. But that is why it is important to make sure that the tone is set and we don't listen to the military-industrial complex. We don't listen to the Fed. And we try and enter into a world without sanctions, where countries just trade with each other, based not upon Israel trying to detopple Iran and implement regime change, but basically countries just getting on with each other and being able to negotiate diplomacy, just like Iran wanted to do with the nuclear deal when it was reversed and torn up, that created this situation. And fake alliances that sidestep Iran created the Abraham Accords that led to October the 7th, the resistance, and the situation that we are in right now, where civilians get killed as a result of the profits of the military-industrial complex. Anyway, it is minted by depositing the equivalent amount of the basket of assets in gold, and it is measured in gold as well as a unit, which makes it quite hard as a unit of account, because people think in dollars, but there is a genuine attempt to try and make people think in terms of gold as the unit as well. The nodes will be synchronized nodes as well. There's said there's going to be no capital controls. It's going to be freely traded or bought and sold. It's said that there will be stock exchanges that will be denominated in units. And then the units can be traded into gold exchanges, stock exchanges. And this is designed that the remaining any of the new nations that join BRICS will be required to operate a node and transition into this system as well if they voluntarily join it as well. And so, yeah, the weaknesses are the backing to gold, the auditability, and the nodes will basically broadcast all of this and will be stored across the different node operators for proof of reserves based upon those systems. And the unit token is going to be a governance token as well. Okay, so we shall see. I'll keep my Bitcoin, but I definitely believe that it's a good thing if something like this can be operated like a DAO with nodes, and we can track and monitor all of those weaknesses as well, and we can get a nice market for imports and exports. But where will the reserve currencies be held? That is an interesting question. I didn't see that, because when you hold a currency with a bank, that is subject to all the bank risks of a fractional reserve system, and nobody holds that much cash. They tend to hold it in the debt or the bonds of the country. And so does this create a demand for bonds in those countries that have bad credit ratings? Well, it can have an impact on that. So I will keep watching the markets. Will it be stored in bonds? Will it be stored in cash? Will there be a proof of stake protocol? And how will that work? And apparently there's going to be a staking element to it. We will see. I didn't get to see many details of exactly how it will be done. And all units will be fungible. So the idea is that it can be spent in any way. And if you want to implement sanctions, you have to track those addresses, as opposed to a central bank digital currency where you could freeze them as well. So based upon that, we've had a series of announcements in the macro section. Russia now says, as a result of sanctions, 92% of its trade and payments with Belarus are conducted in national currencies without the dollars. They used to be done in dollars. It was also announced that 90% of its transactions with China are done in their local currencies without being done in dollars. So this is reducing the demand for dollars. And also more than 50% of Russia's transactions with India are no longer done in dollars, which is creating demand for the local currencies, which is a win-win. And then they can have a mechanism for implementing exactly what America did. So there were different announcements. We saw a quote from Russia stating ahead of the conference that the dollar has discredited itself. And there was more announcements as well, that essentially 2 Ukrainian regional officers were accused of corruption when they were found with $6 million in cash that directly came from America and was printed by the Fed. This led to a wave of geopolitical announcements, and that brings us into the final section of what the hell is going to happen and what will be the impact, and why you need to protect yourself with Bitcoin in self-custody, because if any of this escalates in the direction that the military-industrial complex wants it to go, I want Bitcoin in my pocket. I want Bitcoin that I can spend without government permission, and I want Bitcoin whose monetary policy is fixed with no central banksters that can flip it and create inflation. And I want Bitcoin for that reason. So we're now going to move into the geopolitical section, which is the final section of the weekly Bitcoin Hard Talk. Do me a favor, repost, share if you haven't already, put a comment section below, help the algorithm get this information out to as many people. I'll take a quick sip of water and I'll be right back with the geopolitical section as well. And remember to open a browser with simondixon.com. So if you haven't got one already, make that free membership to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. Okay, let's jump into the geopolitical section. Right, very important announcement. The Saudi Crown Prince, MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, he said that he will not be attending the BRICS conference and the BRICS summit in Russia. That is a signal to either remain neutral or it is a signal to the US, don't worry. But it is not a signal that is going all in on BRICS. That is a flex, and that is not good for BRICS adoption, even though he is kind of staying in the middle. But it means it could be good that he is trying to engage in diplomacy. Now, remember, without a Palestinian cause, there is no Abraham Alliance. It's not that MBS wants to do that. It's because there would be riots in the streets because the people want self-determination for Palestine. And that is why October the 7th happened, because it was about to be sidestepped based upon Trump's negotiation, based upon Netanyahu's foreign policy. And that was a disaster policy rather than following China's peace plan, which is a free Palestine, normalization between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And then that leads to a retreat of foreign policy and foreign bases in the US. And then oil can be used for the interest of the people in the Middle East. It can rebuild rather than having to negotiate the petrodollar, keep the petrodollar up. But it can do that on a voluntary basis and trade with America, trade with China, trade with Russia, and we remove all of these sanctions in a peace plan as well. That as an alternative to America's war plan, which was to reverse the NATO peace agreements and agitate and poke the bear of Russia, reverse the one China policy, aggravate and poke the bear of China with sanctions to try and get them to reunify, and also poke the bear of Iran by reversing all of the peace agreements and allowing Israel to have no self-determination for the Palestinian cause and have illegal nukes, while at the same time have reverse the nuclear deal with Iran, destabilizing the whole region and putting Saudi Arabia in this very compromising position because Israel wants to commit ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Palestinian people. Okay. Now, Nigeria decided to do a resistance. Remember, in Niger, they threw out the American base. They allowed Russia to support. And now Nigeria is selling crude oil in their local currency, the Naira, rather than actually doing it in dollars as well. So that's reducing the demand in some of the African regions as well. Russia came out and says that it has proof. Now, this is a big problem. Why this is being announced right now, because he obviously knew it already through KGB intelligence. But he has proof that the United States and the United Kingdom were involved in the terrorist attack by blowing up the Nord Stream gas pipeline and sabotaging it, which destroyed the German economy. And now the German economy had to buy its natural gas, and that created inflation, and that destroyed the electric vehicle industry. And at the same time, they started sanctioning Russia. And so that cars are way more expensive when they could have been exported for cheap from China. And it started ruining the European economy to get European central bank bailouts to destroy the sovereignty of the European nations as they need to borrow more and more and more, and create a demand for the euro dollar in these terrorist attacks that has created so much problem for America's allies, Europe. And if you treat your allies like that, you can imagine how they treat their enemies. And one of those enemies was as a result of the Korean War, where essentially America implemented a covert regime change, split Korea into two, created the North Korean communist style, and also left the capitalist part of South Korea. And the Federal Reserve, when it was engaging in Rothschild operations like funding the Bolshevik Revolution that took Russia and replaced the largest gold reserve with communism, because Rothschild were funding both ideologies on both sides of the Civil War by supporting the Federal Reserve for capitalism, and but doing it through crony capitalism with the debt-based Ponzi scheme, and also the Soviet Union, that was the failed ideology communism, which was designed to bankrupt Russia, and it obviously fell in the end of it. This led to the Cold War and all the different wars, which led to the emergence of North Korea, massive debt by America. And now North Korea is starting to deploy armed forces because America couldn't go into it because it decided to have its own nuclear program, which led to its sanctions. But now no one goes in, demonstrating to everybody that the only way to keep out regime change from America and from Israel is to have a nuke. And what signal does that send to Iran? It says that North Korea is now supporting, it's driving all of these forces together and driving this multipolar world, which is increasing the cells of the military-industrial complex as well in the proof of weapons network. But anyway, North Korea said that it would deploy troops in Ukraine in support of Russia. And if anything were to happen with South Korea, basically it says that it will support Ukraine. And there was also signals that it would support Iran as well with recent visits. Today, the prime minister or president, I forget which one it is, of Iran is also having a meeting with Russia to solidify the terms of engagement that the more America sends to Ukraine, the more Russia will support Iran as well. And now we are waiting for the Israeli retaliations. At the same time, Russian President Putin, as we said, met with, make sure I get the name right, President Rezikian. Sorry, I'm so bad with the names. That is happening as we speak. Now, remember how covert regime change happens. Covered it many times. It is CI operations. There's no congressional approval. They happen behind the scenes. It creates more inflation. It is supporting of the military-industrial complex. And basically, it is always justified because they say these countries are engaging in human right violation. Some of those are actually fabricated CIA operations where they actually, use the media in order to exaggerate and create fake actors that engage in videos to make you think that these atrocities are not part of Western values. But we are starting to see the next stage of the covert US regime change within Iran. I'll remind you how it works, but what was the next step? Well, suddenly, because they pretend that they care about women's rights based upon human rights violations within Iran, they pretend that the war is all about supporting women's rights within Iran. They also even support and fund resistance against the current regime. And you don't know whether it's real or the Iranian people. And then they use the media in order to push out narratives. Now, I'm not supporting the government by any shape or means, but people should struggle against their governments without foreign interference and foreign meddling. Well, this happens time and time again. Don't believe me? Read the book, Covert Regime Change, which went through all the declassified documents, and you can read the emails on WikiLeaks of all the governments and many of the over 100 regime changes that have been implemented in order to make you hate a country through complete deception, which has led to hundreds of millions of deaths. It's absolutely disgusting. But it's the way the world works when you follow the money and follow the proof of weapons network to support the central banks. So the exiled prince of Iran, his name is Raza Pahlavi. He says and released a video saying he is ready to lead a traditional government forward with a democracy within Iran, convenient timing at the exact same time when everybody is being pushed into the covert regime change, which explains the aggression. This is classic 100% CIA covert regime change using all of its allies and proxies and militias in order to engage in terrorism, which I released a video on my X, if you didn't watch it, a 16-minute little video that explains the last time they did this in Iran in order to take over the oil and execute a military coup in 1953. And then they even replaced a nice democracy with a dictatorship and Shah and kingdom, which is a move because it's easier to negotiate and control them. Well, anyway, there's been about 100 of these since World War II that I've read about, and through the declassified documents in WikiLeaks. Essentially, MI6, CIA, and Mossad, they execute a coup, and then they had the assassination attempt in 1953 in Iran. And guess what? They had another one in 1958 in Lebanon that led to the two different groups that they're trying to play a civil war with right now in order to topple Lebanon with the current illegal occupation being done and the illegal invasion being done. And guess what? America said we don't support the invasion in Lebanon, and suddenly they now do support it, and they start pretending that they're negotiating peace treaties. All one clown and pony show in order to manipulate you and make you feel a certain way. So what do they do? How does it look? Well, what you do is you destroy the economy through sanctions. That is the first step. And so don't allow any of the peace negotiations to happen. Don't allow Iran to negotiate with America. Just destroy it through sanctions. And then that creates a resistance with the people against the economic turmoil that the sanction creates. Then what you do is you use media in order to demonize the country and make it sound like the worst country in the world, so that you can make it look like what happens next is as a result of violating human rights. And even there may be human rights that are happening, but they ignore the ones that are happening in other countries where they don't want a regime change. Then what they do is they use just what they're accusing Iran of, proxies and militias like the IDF and ISIS and Al-Qaeda, in order to push forward and destabilize the regions, which turns, a region just like we see in Iraq and Syria right now, which we all know that Iraq was actually an installed puppet government of the US with Saddam Hussein and used to weaken Iran. And then suddenly they just get rid of Saddam Hussein as well. So they don't really care about democracies. It's definitely not about democracies. It's about ruining countries, and it ended up to the death of 1 million people. Then what you do is you install a US puppet leader, and then suddenly they come across as the rational people because they start accepting IMF loans and destroy their own currencies in order to make sure that their resources are handed over to America when they don't play ball. And the resources basically get taken, oil, or they get priced in US dollars, or they decide to enter into these normalization agreements and basically put a US military base in your country so that you basically become a US puppet supporting the dollar at the expense of your own people. And that's why you end up with supporting Israel, even though your people are disgusted by the complete terrorism that Israel is doing on the Palestinian people. And then you always need to buy more weapons from the military-industrial complex because your kingdom and dictatorship is at risk of a revolution, as happened in Iran in 1979 because of the military coup that happened in 1953 that leads to America funding real terrorist groups and then demonizing through media control the Muslim people, where everyone starts thinking being Muslim means you want to chop off people's heads, even though it's completely against the religion and has caused to all immense problems with the fake war of terror, which was created for NATO for profit, and creates the narrative that all the Jewish people need to move to Israel in order to join the IDF, ethnically cleanse, and be put at risk of their lives because of the resistance against the very same terror groups that they're funding, which ISIS, coincidentally, by the way, is Iran's enemy. And people think that Iran is involved in that. You get the psyop. Anyway, I've covered it. Wash, rinse, repeat. It happens time and time again. In the time that I've been covering just this year alone, the next one is Venezuela. Textbook. Same operation. They're doing it in Bangladesh right now. Same operation. They did it in Pakistan. They took the pro-Palestinian prime minister and just put him in prison. Just like that. This is what happens. And they're currently doing it in Lebanon right now. And so the latest updates, let's have a look at the Lebanese war now. Now, remember, when I said that this would happen in Lebanon, people went, "You're crazy. You're crazy." But this is going to happen in Yemen. It's going to happen in Iraq. It's going to happen in Syria. And it's going to eventually happen in Iran. Watch it. Get ahead. Follow the money. But the problem is that may take us to World War III if we don't de-escalate it and just work on diplomacy instead. So let's look at a few steps ahead, and then we'll close and wrap this one up. There is currently now 2,000 deaths inside Lebanon. Those that are anti-Hezbollah are realizing that there's a divide and conquer strategy. The army's not doing anything because the army is a US covert operation from the takeover and coup in 1958. And so they don't do anything. But if you can divide the people from Hezbollah, you can create a civil war, and Iran can just come over and turn parts of it into Gaza and destroy it. We're having more and more civilian casualties. They're saying Hezbollah is under the ground, so we can just blow up civilian buildings. And that is creating an overwhelm of the hospital infrastructure. And humanitarian aid isn't getting in. They've now started to assassinate US journalists as well, killing US journalists that are reporting on the news. US now is making announcements that they fully support the operation by Israel within Lebanon. What started out as they don't support suddenly becomes war creep, and Israel has the right to defend itself. And they spread through the media, cover up operations to make it look like Hezbollah isn't a resistance against occupation by Israel. They were pretending, America was pretending that they're going to negotiate a 24-day ceasefire. And what happened? What does Israel do every time Hamas or Hezbollah agrees to a ceasefire? They assassinate the negotiator. And so the negotiator gets wiped out, and then they escalate instead. So it's all a game to pretend like there is going to be a ceasefire, but it's all about getting to the regime change within Iran and persuading the world to spend more money with the military-industrial complex and protect the petrodollar so you can artificially create demand for that dollar. So all of the peace negotiations go. This happened with the leader negotiating peace for Hamas, gone as soon as peace agreement has arrived. Same within Lebanon, Nasrallah, gone as soon as peace is reached. They pretend they're trying to bring the hostages home. Remember, 3 days after there was a complete negotiation to do the hostage swap, to return the hostages, Netanyahu and Israel didn't want it because they don't care about the hostage. This was about weaponizing October the 7th in order to push financial interest of Israel, which is a militia and proxy of America, and American Congress is controlled with Israel from money printed from the Federal Reserve. And this is why they made sure that there was no peace agreements within Gaza. And it is all about war escalation. So then they can do Syria, then they can do Iraq. But remember the macro section, Iraq may fight back with oil embargoes, and Iran may decide to go after the gas within Israel as a tick for tack. And that can then decide the election within America based upon the economic situation and turbulence globally, and everyone loses as well. Iran made an announcement based upon that they are fully prepared for war. They don't want war, but they're fully prepared for war because of all the bad faith negotiations and because they were stalling Iran, pretending they were negotiating peace, and then escalated and assassinated leaders instead. The US and the UK is alleged, basically they're in direct conflict already with Yemen as well. They're trying to protect their interest in the Red Sea because it's like a sanction. So they're already there, ready for escalation. And Israel can decide at what point they want UK and US to have boots in the ground and support them in the airstrikes in order to take out Iran, which is the 40-year goal. And the whole reason why Israel created all these false flag operations. And the whole reason why the media was used in order to make you care about women's rights in Iran and not care about women's rights that are being blown up and killed in Palestine and not care about women's rights within Saudi Arabia because you're not meant to care, even though American weapons are being used in order to kill women in Yemen in order to profit the military industrial complex and profit and prop up the dollar as well with severe women's human right violations. But of course, the video that you see is the one thing which is IRGC and the moral police forced the hijab that apparently led to a lady dying in prison. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. But I just don't trust anything anymore because I know and have read the declassified documents and how they fake these operations to make the media and the people uprise against their people and try and create civil wars for the profit of the US military industrial complex and propping up the evil proof of weapons network. And guess what? The Fed don't care about America. The Fed will do what it did with UK, like the Bank of England. It dumped it as soon as it was no longer useful, replaced GBP with the dollar, and the Fed will do the same as long as the US is no longer useful when America is deep in debt and it creates a civil war because of the financial apartheid that it created in the first place as well. This could escalate, as we said, to Saudi Arabia, which could create an oil crisis. And this means that it could be a direct war between US and Iran very, very quickly, just based upon as soon as Israel wants to do it. And Congress will justify it, and US media will make you think it's something that's not. Biden came out and said that he is not in support if Israel targets the nuclear fields. So Biden doesn't want this to happen during the Harris election over the next 30 days and before January. He requested, though, that there are no oil strikes. So if you want to make a real message, you go after the islands. If not, you can go after some of the oil fields. But it's not in America's interest unless it wants Trump to be the next election, as we covered earlier. Israel, basically, it looks like my best guess at the moment, and this may be happening as we speak, is that Israel and the US pretending not to be involved. And when I say US, it's not Congress, it's CIA in secrecy, have agreed that the bombing within Iran will most likely be missile production centers and warehouses, which is de-escalatory move, which means that while Trump is begging the Israeli lobby that he will be a good person for the Israel project, Harris may be the chosen one because Trump may be volatile, which may be the two reasons why they said in his hostage videos 2 assassination attempts. And make sure that you tell the world that if you get assassinated, it's Iran's fault, creating the perfect environment of Trump to beg for his life. I'm not saying that's what's happening, but follow the money and it makes sense, right? Don't listen to the politicians, don't listen to the media, follow the money and you can understand what may be happening. Now, guess what? As we said earlier, all this time, America is having hurricanes and natural disasters and people are dying. There's no money for them. There's only money for Israel. There's only money for Ukraine. Who is running America? Does Biden is forced to come out and say something nice to Americans? It's a disaster. Why isn't America serving America anymore? Because Congress has been bought by Israel. Fed is printing money for the military industrial complex. And the Fed doesn't care about America. It is designed to take America off the gold reserve, bankrupt it, replace it with the fiat currency standard, fund all the wars, and then just be a useful tool using the dollar for as long as they possibly can while the New World Order transitions and they profit from World War III. That's why Bitcoin is a resistance movement against it. That's why Bitcoin is important. And that's why Bitcoin proof of work made all the right moves and didn't copy the crypto scams. And that's why it's important to have multipolarity. And that's why it's important for BRICS to create their node structure, and good to them. Hopefully it works. And that's why America will sanction against it so hard as well. But we shall see, because power structure can train and we can go to diplomacy. We've already proven, because America has diplomacy with Saudi Arabia, even though there are all the human rights violations. And you can negotiate with Iran instead. But it's only Israel that said don't negotiate with Iran. So what's the current situation? The current situation is that Israel needs to retaliate. It wants a regime change, and the only way to get a regime change is if America does it for them. If America will do it for them, is because you have to control Congress, which Israel does, and you need to control the media in order to get the message out that this is being done for human rights, which it already has set the narrative. And you need to create a false flag operation to persuade Americans that this is irrational actor Iran, who has been acting very rationally, as you can see through this tick for tack if you've been following it. And they have now created a checkmate scenario for the regime change. If Iran is now in a situation where, in order to protect itself from America and from Israel, its best bet is to create a nuke, because look at what happens in North Korea. You can protect yourself and you can trade with other countries. So now, because it knows of Israel is aggressing and US is controlled by Israel, it has to develop a nuke. And there are rumors that it could take its uranium and enrich it and turn that into a nuke. The CIA says that it's not doing that. But that is exactly what Iran is faced with. And if it does that, it looks like a crazy actor, because the US media and UK media will say they want to nuke us because they want to expand and kill the world. Tommy Robinson will tell, you see, these crazy Muslims, they're building nukes in order to take over the world and take over Europe. That creates civil unrest. That plays into the civil war narrative. And that can either destroy the dollar or it can protect it for a little bit longer. But the CIA, everybody else, Mossad, has already put their next plan in place anyway. Now, what will happen if Iran does develop a nuke? Well, that will lead to the US retaliating. And so the US and Iran end up in a direct conflict. What if they don't develop one? Well, Israel will bomb it and escalate as well. And they will bomb their nuclear facilities. And that will create a situation where Russia has to decide what it's doing next. And that is why Trump is pushing for his own version of, basically, Trump is being portrayed as the peacemaker. But he's saying, Israel, I will give you everything you want in Iran. We can turn Iraq into Iraq. I'll build the military base. We can fund the militias in order to topple the region, and we can create a civil war. And no, we won't replace it with a democracy. We'll just destroy the region. And then our US base can be used in order to take over the oil, and we can create a slush fund and then you can be the sole nuclear power, and we can expand NATO to control the Middle East and hold all the dictators as hostages. We can do the same in Asia. Anyway, Iran at this stage only has long-range missiles. It has its proxies. That means that the only way for this to protect, Russia to protect, is for Russia to actually support it in its air defense. And that would be a direct conflict between the two largest nuclear powers, US and Russia. And I'm sure this looks exactly like it did with Iraq, right? You had a fake false flag, Mossad, and CIA operation. 9/11 had their hands all over it. That created the narrative of the fake war on terror. You had the fake false flag operation and the pretend that Iraq was doing weapons of mass destruction. What did Harris come out and say? Harris came out, she did an interview this week on 60 Minutes, and she had a segment where she said, Iran is our number one enemy. She also said that her highest priority, if she gets elected, is to ensure that Iran never has nuclear power. You see the game? This is even different to Biden's policy, which we're meant to believe is the president of the United States at the moment. Biden said that China is the greatest enemy. And that after China, it is Russia. And after that, it is North Korea, Iran, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS. They're at the bottom of the pile because they militarize them through the CIA. Even the CIA, they put out a paper that says that there's no evidence that Iran has a nuclear capacity. They're saying that they're using, their nuclear power just for civilians in a nuclear power program, not for weapons of mass destruction. I don't know whether that's true, whether that's not as well, but that's what everyone's being told when you follow the money. The reality is that Iran is being pushed and pushed and pushed. And eventually this may lead to a situation where US bases that are in Iraq and Syria gets the retaliation. That brings Saudi Arabia in, despite China wanting to normalize. So Saudi Arabia, US, and Israel is essentially the ones that create all these terror organizations as well, that is terrorizing Iran. That's what we support when we support the dollar. Because they want Saudi Arabia to protect the petrodollar, as I've already said. And they'll continue to not judge any human rights of a country where they don't want to topple that regime. They'll take sanctions off the table. But why can't they just do that anyway? Because when you follow the money, you realize that the proof of weapons network is a violent terrorist regime backed by central banks that use intelligence agencies with no congressional or parliamentary approval, pretending that they're exporting democracy, when the reality is they betrayed the Constitution through militia, through proxies, and through terrorism. And then the media is used in order to make you think the opposite is happening. Iran could trade nicely. Iran could have a deal. In fact, they had one. And it was reversed. And it was decided to go to violence instead. That led to the situation that we're in right now. This is because the military-industrial complex are in charge. NATO is in charge, and they are a racketeering organization that's changing all of the peace treaties. It's like a mob that's in charge right now. I told you all the reasons why. They want to make Israel, Saudi Arabia, the nuclear powers. Don't you think Saudi Arabia is going to want to nuke after that as well? Because it's going to be worried about protecting ourselves. It's all happening again. It's exactly like we saw with the Iraq side. And that was a disaster. That led America deep in debt. What was the justification? Israel is weaponizing October the 7th. And did you watch the documentaries? It was October the 7th this week. Did you watch the Grey Zone documentaries that showed exactly where all the accusations of mass rape came from? Exactly where all the accusations that didn't happen, of all of the additional, beheading babies, baking babies, putting babies on. It was all fake. They showed the exact person that did it, their record. Watch the Grey Zone documentary to see it. And now October the 7th is being used just like 9/11 was being used. And now you get the fake weapons of mass destruction narrative being used on Iran, just like it was used on Iraq. And you will get some kind of new terror threat. We had the civil unrest in UK, civil unrest in America. Maybe this is, hopefully not, the assassination of Trump. And that will be the rhetoric to go in there and escalate US and have the regime change and everything that was planned in the first place. A few more announcements that came out because many people know about these regime changes. As a result of that, Italy came out and made an announcement. They accused Israel of committing war crimes and that Israel is shelling it was actually shelling several UN peacekeepers in Lebanon. And so assassinations is happening on the UN peacekeepers within Lebanon, and Italy came out and said that's a war crime. Israel decided to take down one of the US journalists, and they're suddenly being subjected to torture. They've been taken basically as a hostage for exposing. What did they do? They exposed that many of the Iran bombs actually got through, and the media was trying to pretend they didn't get through when Iran retaliated on military operations. And so because of that, the journalist is now in prison, being beaten, being tortured. Guess who that is? That's a journalist that did some work for the Grey Zone. And the Grey Zone, his name, by the way, is Jeremy Lofredo, an American. You don't hear Biden talk about it. You did hear about it when it was 1979 and Iran did it. You don't hear about it when it's happening by Israel. And this was the very same week that Grey Zone created the documentary that completely debunked October the 7th, that there was no rapes on October the 7th. There was no systemic, there was killing. There was a military operation in order to swap hostages, just had been done before. And I encourage everyone to watch that documentary. I'll make sure that we link to it. I'll probably put it on my blog so that everyone can watch it. I'll make sure we get that updated this week. But it revealed, basically look at the documentary Atrocity Inc. And I'll try and add it to my blog as well. We had an announcement from Spain's Prime Minister this week, Minister Sanchez. He was calling on all countries to stop selling weapons to Israel. France, Macron did an embargo, and Netanyahu came out and said, we are freeing Lebanon and the Lebanese people. He also came out and said, we are freeing the Iranian people, and that is why we are doing this. Why not negotiate with Iran then and free Palestine and stop the illegal settlements? Because that's what peace would look like. But that's not what the Fed wants. That's not what the Bank of England wants. That's not what the CIA wants. That's not what Mossad wants. That's not what MI6 wants. And that's not what you're being told. And that's not what your Congress and that's not what your Parliament are being doing. And they don't get any decisive in the matter because they need Israel's money. that was printed anyway. Hence BRICS. And so I hope you found it useful to understand what BRICS is trying to achieve. I'm not saying whether they will succeed or fail, but I think it's an effort that will be interesting. Disclaimers aside, I will follow all laws in my country. There are very strict rules around sanctions, anti-money laundering, all these types of things. I follow every rule by the book, but I educate people on these things. None of this is financial advice. You should seek legal advice, whether you're doing the right or wrong or anything. But here is the reality. We are in the midst of a currency war. And how do you win a currency war? In a currency war, absolute power corrupts absolutely. You protect yourself with the only currency that can't be manipulated or taken down by governments. There's only one of those, digital hard sound money, Bitcoin, and hold it in self-custody. Not financial advice. I don't know whether the past equals the future, but it always protected. And that's what I continue to do every single month as well. But what is the path to peace? Currency competition. The more currencies, the better. The more peace, the better the currencies, because absolute power corrupts absolutely. And always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting and crazy times in financial history. Some are going to get absolutely wrecked, and some are even going to die. I don't want that for you. I want as many people to have this information, be prepared, and be on the right side of this change, because others are going to do really well. And I want Bitcoin in self-custody in the hands of as many people as possible. I'd like the Bitcoiners to be doing it with peace, love, and unity. And I'd like to be everybody and as many people as possible. So please do share, please do like, please do join me at simondixon.com for the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. I'll be creating as much as I can, working on the video series I do every 4 years to guide people through all these transitions. And I want as many people prepared for a world dominated by Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. Peace. I'll see you next week.